Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing While Black,
a podcast for writers by writers to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
And I'm LP. And joining us today for the second week of Just Keep Writing While Black in 2023 for Black History Month is Yvette, Lisa, and Ndlovu.
Yeah. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is exciting. So before we launch into our normal questions, do you mind just telling our audience a little bit about yourself?
My name is Yvette Lisa Ndlovu. I am a Sarungano from Zimbabwe. Sarungano means storyteller. I am the author of the short story collection Drinking from Graveyard Wells, as well as the co-founder of the Voodoo Knots Summer Fellowship for Black Writers.
Hey.
Oh, that's so awesome. We'll be definitely jumping. Speaking of the stories, let's just talk about the collection of stories. So we always start with the first question. And our typical first question is, tell us about the writing of this short story collection in 3 words. And the words don't have to be connected. It doesn't have to be a phrase, just 3 words that come to mind.
Afro-surreal. Wait. Women filled with rage. That's more than that's more than 3.
Okay.
Vengeful spirits. And I'll throw in Southern African mythology in there. Way longer than 3 words, but yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. So normally what we do is LP is frantically typing everything that you said. So we're going to kind of go back through those. And if you can talk us through why you chose them, that'd be awesome. So Afro-surreal was the first one.
Yeah, this is an Afro-surrealist collection. There's a lot of absurdity, social horror, everything Afro-surreal and spectacular. You got some magical realism in there. Women filled with rage. I think a lot of the stories kind of, deal with women, Black women in particular, taking on the patriarchy and capitalism. So, you have, that rage, that feminist rage coming in through there. Vengeful spirits, well, there's a lot of Southern African mythology, creatures, that sort of thing. So you have people speaking from, beyond the grave throughout this collection.
So I want to run it back and ask you to describe Afro-surrealism.
Yeah.
Partly for people listening.
Yeah, Afro-surrealism is about telling the narrative of the contemporary Black experience. These experiences being so absurd and, sometimes so horrific that they don't seem real, that they seem surreal. So Afro-surrealism leans into that absurdity to talk about those real issues. So I think Get Out by Jordan Peele is one of the most famous examples of Afro-surrealism in a film. So my collection kind of, tips into that horror and absurdism and fantasy to talk about, real things happening in Zimbabwe, what it's like for women living under a dictatorship, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I've been reading this in real time, and we're in a group chat together. So you've collected several of my thoughts about this. So I'm going to espouse them publicly so that everyone else can hear them as well. So one of the comps for this book is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Machado, who is a brilliant writer and fantastic. And I understand why it's a comp, but I love, and Machado's collection is very much feminist and looking at kind of a postmodern woman in a lot of ways. And that's super interesting. In the ways that this compares and contrasts, your collection is uniquely Black, is uniquely Zimbabwean, it's uniquely Southern African, it's uniquely woman in a way that I've never seen before. I wanted to know what, besides Her Body and Other Parties, you think of as, what other books you think of as in conversation with Drinking from Graveyard?
Yeah, definitely What It Means When a Man Falls from the Sky by Lesley Arimah. This is a Nigerian short story collection. I think it came out maybe 5 years ago. Just really, really great. One of my favorite stories from that collection is about a woman who they live in a society where women can make children out of baby dolls and breathe them to life. And it uses Nigerian mythology really, really well. So yeah, you can kind of see the Afrofuturism, Afro-surrealism are in that collection. I would say some Zimbabwean authors are NoViolet Bulawayo. She recently had a post-colonial fable called Glory, which was one of my favorite books from last year. Yeah, so she uses like animal characters to talk about the fall of the Mugabe dictatorship in Zimbabwe. Oh, and I would also say my work is in conversation with Shingai Kagunda's work, the author of the novella, and This Is How to Stay Alive, which is a great time travel novella. And that's my homegirl.
Sorry, I'm adding these to the show notes.
I don't have to include this, but I like literally printed it so that I could walk around it, so I could walk around at work and read the stories. Like my students are working, and I'm just like, like, so I've been poring over this for the last several days. I really think it's interesting. I don't know. I'm new to this term, Afro surreal, but when you said "Get Out," that rang a bell in my head for sure. One of the stories that stood out to me was there's a subtlety to the horror aspects to some of the stories, like the one with the eyes, where the character loses his eyes, and there's like this transfer of, I think you call it natural. What was it called?
Naturalization.
Naturalization, yeah. So I don't know. That was the first one that came into my head when you were talking. So I don't want to spoil every story in this because every one of our listeners needs to read this whole thing. But can you talk just about that particular story?
Yeah. So with that story, it's called "Home Became a Thing with Thorns," and I'm exploring the surreal experience of being a Black immigrant. So the world of that story is kind of like a hybrid between a mashup of America and South Africa, where there's a lot of Afrophobia, xenophobia to Black people in particular. So, I'm an immigrant to the USA. I have family in South Africa, so I was kind of taking my experiences and my family's experiences from being in the US and South Africa. And, with immigrating, you kind of have to give up something. So in that story, characters have to give up something that they love, and they don't know what the state is going to take from them until it takes the thing. So you can lose body parts, like the main character at the beginning of the story loses his eyes because he's an artist and that's his passion. Other people lose, family members, recipes, their language, and different things that are integral to who they are, but they have to give it up to the state as the price for naturalization, for becoming a citizen of that place.
Well, it was just so, I mean, it was heartbreaking at the end, of course, but like just the subtlety of just, okay, this person's losing this, and then to have that character working where they're basically dealing with the discarded
waste
parts, the waste. Oh my God. Like just the imagery in that combined with, like you said, giving something up to go somewhere else. It was, I don't know. That was just one of so many stories in here. So I don't know. I don't have a question necessarily. Sometimes I read things and I just don't know where to go with it. But like that one stood out to me mostly because, especially, and going back to what you were saying about the surrealness of it, is at some point the other character gives the eyes back, and then they're just back. And there's something when you read it, it's like, oh well, there's got to be some. Nope, they're just back. Okay, this works, but it's okay.
Well, it's such a powerful thing when such a powerful meditation on what it means to immigrate, and the idea that someone is willing to take something from you that doesn't mean anything to them, just so that they can't take something from you. And it means so little to them that if you were to get it back, they wouldn't notice, Yeah, I loved that story. I also really, you heard me gush about Plumtree, and I again compared that to The Husband Stitch by Carmen Machado. It's the first story in that in her collection. One of the things that I enjoyed about it, both stories actually, is in a short story collection you can achieve intertextuality. And I think you get that throughout this. Like, one of the things I enjoy about your collection is that it teaches you how to read it. It teaches you how to interact with certain words. And then as the as it goes on, these words are not foreign anymore. They're not things that I need to go look up, because as they come up again and again, I'm like, oh, and it's also teaching me about the culture that the worlds exist in. Like, even if they're not exactly secondary, they are of the same part of the world, which is really powerful. So so I learned about how to read it while I'm reading it. Amazing. And that's one form of intertextuality. You can get that across a collection. I think about lpkindred by Elizabeth Strout. I think about The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filia. But like The Husband Stitch, Plumtree, True Stories manages to have intertextuality within one piece. And I just think that's so fucking cool.
Thank you.
For anyone who's listening and doesn't care, this is fine. The Stitch is brilliant, but I don't like it. I think it's far too clever. And I think this is just so earnest. And so Carmen Machado is brilliant. Me not liking a piece of hers, she's going to get over, because she's going to go ahead and continue to be rich and like not care about what I have to say, and that's fine. But like Plumtree, I just think it's so brilliant. It achieves intertextuality, but it's also so earnest. It's so heartfelt, and like it leaves a gaping wound in you when you finish it. And I was like 2 pages away from it before I messaged you about it. Two pages away from being finished with it before I was like, I can't with you. How would you the Plumtree to someone who hasn't read it yet?
It's a story in vignettes about the surreal experience of being a woman, and the subtitle of the piece is True Stories. Even though there's magic, witches flying in wing baskets, different kinds of magics in there. There's still an element of truth. Each of those stories is a real story, either that happened to somebody that I know, or a story that I heard in the community. So yeah, I'm trying to, I haven't read Plumtree in a while. So like, which one was your favorite vignette? Just like remind me.
It was so challenging about it, because as I went on, it became clear that the different stories, some certain characters from this vignette were the same character in another vignette. And as that continued, I was just like, oh, I can't break this apart, because if I were to break this apart or excise parts of it, I would miss the effect of the whole. And it's so powerful in that way. Switching gears slightly. Oh, sorry.
No, I have a favorite one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was some connected. So I'm with you, LP. There was a couple, the connectivity between the vignettes was amazing. But the opening to it, I'm like, and this is after I had read, I don't know how many stories before this. I'm like, okay, so this is the start of this one. Like, I don't know what's going to, you know what I mean? Like, so that, and then you connect it back a little bit later. So Ants obviously was probably my favorite. But then you're right. There was the orange and the egg too. Like some of the imagery combined with what it means, what the act actually means that these people are going through is just, it's so powerful and hard to read at the same time in a good way, if that makes sense.
Put your notebook down.
Yeah, I had to like open it up and be like, okay, let me like quickly read through the story. So yeah, and the one that you're talking about, so it starts off with a young man, and he's taking a piece, is urinating, and ants are coming out instead of urine, and that's like a curse. And so that's actually based off of this belief back home that when you get married, you can fix your partner. And so what that means is if you fix your wife, she can't cheat on you. And if she cheats on you, then a curse is going to manifest itself onto, the man she cheats on, or whoever she decides she cheats on, the husband with. So that's kind of like a form of like control in a way, but that's using magic to control women, to control their sexuality, to control their behavior. So it's like, again, using these surreal aspects to talk about, this, abuse and control that happens.
One of the other things I liked about the use of magical realism in this, I feel like magical realism gets kind of like ghettoized to Latine people. Me personally, and people can disagree as they feel. I think that magical realism, the way that we look at it now, is kind of a response to the West telling us that who we were before the West encountered us was savage and unimportant and didn't deserve space. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this collection is that there's a lot of that frisson of being a modern person who's been told that, indigenous belief systems and folklore are not real and that they have no value, but then having to interact with them. It's a different kind of fish out of water story that shows up several times. And I was just wondering, like, do you have thoughts on the use of magical realism in your collection?
Yeah, I do. So that's one of the things that I love about magical realism is that you have magic happening in a mundane setting, in a an everyday world just like our own. And that's something that Afro surrealism does, as well as Ngano. So these are the traditional oral fables from back home. So one of the key feature of Ngano is that you have these fantastic things happening in an ordinary village, in a very mundane place. So that's something I was like kind of harkening back to is Ngano or Ngane Kwane. And thinking about how can I use like the fantastic to talk about the everyday, the mundane. So I love magical realism. I liked what it does to my brain and how I can use it to explore systems of power. And I think that's the beauty of magical realism, specifically like Latin American magical realism, is that it was used to critique colonialism and systems of power by using this mundane this magic in a mundane setting. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do as well. And I think sometimes it gets a bad rap. Like people get really like upset when their work is called magical realism, but that's not the case for me. Like I love the label, so I consider my work magical realism, Afro surrealism. Some of it is Afrofuturist, fantasy, literary fantasy. I know that's a term that other people prefer. So yeah, all the labels.
All right, fantasy without plot isn't literary fantasy. It's just fantasy. No plot.
Right.
No, and I love the mixture. Every story had some. It just felt like there was gonna be something different happening each time. Sometimes it was more fantastical. Sometimes it was a little more subtle. One of the stories, and I have a couple of other. I have many questions, but one of the things I wanted to bring up was I believe, second place is the first loser. That story. Okay, so that one. So the whole time this is happening, like until we realize what that character ends up, what business that character ends up starting, I found it really interesting the way that you depict this. There was some bitterness between the character bringing this white person home, how they're interacting. How you dealt with the grandfather character and the game. Can you talk about? No, you talked about truth. That's my question. You talked about truth before, right? How true? I mean, what parts of the story is true and what's not? I don't know if the lift thing, for example.
Yeah. So the one of the co-founders of Lyft got the idea to set this ride-sharing company when he went on vacation in Zimbabwe. So back home, public transportation is sometimes not the most reliable. So what people do is if somebody has a car, they usually pick up people along the way. So, if you're going to, let's say a grocery store and, you pick people up along the way and then you drop them off, in town, downtown. And this is called a lift, and we spell it Lift. And so when the founder of Lyft was in Zimbabwe on vacation, he saw this kind of rideshare, community rideshare, And it was like, oh, why don't you make this into an app? So, went back to the United States, started the app Lyft, spelled it Lyft instead of Lift. And, Lyft came before Uber. So there was Lyft. And then a few years later, Uber became a thing after Lyft. So I was just thinking about indigenous innovation there, how, Zimbabweans were doing this, nice thing for each other, this community rideshare, because, other people don't have cars, the public transportation is not that reliable. So you have this community innovation that allows people to get around the city, and you just give somebody a small tip to say, thank you for dropping me off. And thinking about how this indigenous innovation was, turned into this capitalist corporation that, exploits drivers, has, all these issues and problems with it. And then a lot of the people actually don't know where the idea came from, that, he went to Zimbabwe, he was on vacation, and, got this idea, was inspired or discovered the idea, and then, went back to America and made the app. And then in that story, I talk about a British explorer, or rather colonizer, called David Livingstone. And, in the history books, he's credited for discovering the Victoria Falls, or Mosi Atunya, which are these beautiful waterfalls. Back home, they're one of the wonders of the world, natural wonders of the world. But, he needed a local guide. There were indigenous people living around the falls. They took him to the falls to show him the falls, but then he's credited for discovering these falls. So how could he have discovered that thing when, there were communities living around, the falls, and took him there? Exactly. So just thinking about that, what does it mean for things to be whitewashed and erased, and how much of the things that we credit white people for were actually things that they saw from, Black communities and took that. Most recently, I was watching a documentary on Netflix, actually, High on the Hog. I think, LP, you're the one who suggested I watch that. Yeah, and, they're talking about mac and cheese, and how it was an enslaved, cook who created that dish in the plantation. But, it's it's the white people that are credited with this dish, because, he was enslaved, is not going to get that credit. So thinking about, little things like that, like where are these ideas actually coming from?
Well, and there's some really, I don't want to spoil this whole story, but we kind of have. But one of the more powerful lines in that is when the white character does learn about the falls, and he'd already been, YouTubing it and everything else, and making his video, and he's like, he just posts it anyway. Yeah. And just that line just speaks volumes to what you're talking about. Is just like, well, I'm still just gonna do it. Yeah. It doesn't matter what the actual truth is.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a good number of these stories that I actually talked to you about before you wrote them. So, hadn't necessarily been paying attention to them as they came out, but like you taught me what a Groot slang was. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's a Southern African cryptid that it has the head of a very large and scary elephant, but the body of a huge serpent. And they hoard diamonds, or they guard diamonds, I should say. Yeah. And if you do not, pay the toll when you come trying to take diamonds, you could lose your life. And there's a story about a Groot slang title story, drinking from graveyard wells. So that took a lot of different turns, that story did. So tell me about, like, what was your thought process with that one? I also want to hear about, damn it, what is it called? No, that was the wrong one. Sorry. That's not drinking from graveyard wells. That's when death comes to find you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I also have a question about the disappearing house story. It's drinking from graveyard wells. Talk to me about one or both of those at your leisure.
Yeah. So when death comes to find you, that's the one about the Groot slang. So with that one, I was, thinking about the diamond industry and blood diamonds. So Zimbabwe has some of the largest diamonds in the world, and the army and the government are in charge of that industry. And so there's this process called the Kimberley process that's supposed to ensure that the world doesn't have blood diamonds, and these big diamond companies that mostly serve America and the West, are not using blood diamonds. But then the definition of a blood diamond is a diamond that was obtained by a rebel army. But then in Zimbabwe, it's not a rebel army; it's the official army of the country that's in charge. So they get away. They're like, oh, technically we're not a rebel army, so it's not blood diamonds. We're the official government. So they can get away with killing people because of that technicality of the definition. So, thinking about that, so we have a character who's an artisanal miner, and he dies. He's killed by the army, and that genocide of the miners is swept under the rug, and that was actually based off of something that happened in Zimbabwe where 200 miners were slaughtered, and nothing happened because it's not a rebel army that did it. It's a official government, so it's not a blood diamond, which is really tragic. So I was thinking about that incident in particular. So when he dies, he kind of goes into this purgatory space that's run by the Grutslang, which is the half elephant, half serpent. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there's lots of things happen underground. Is all I'll say.
So just complicated. Jumping right back in, and then I will stop talking for a little while. So Water Bites Back and Drinking from Graveyard Wells both come from like real stories. So I know because I remember having conversations with you about them. Yeah, I'm curious, like, does anyone know what happened to the houses that that disappeared?
Yeah, okay. So Drinking from Graveyard Wells is about houses. So a neighborhood gossip wakes up one day to discover that houses are disappearing every day. So it's kind of thinking about, is our house next? Who's next? Where are they going? And that's what the story like explores. So it's actually based off of an urban legend, which I believe is true. All urban legends are true. Where in the capital city in Harare, a house disappeared one day. And they actually took a news crew to the neighborhoods to go check it out. And there was no house there when the news crew went. And there are different theories. And the theory that everybody has accepted is that the house flew to a neighboring country, Malawi. And it's just in Malawi now. So that's what happened to the house. So in the story, people are trying to determine what is happening, and they kind of throw around different theories that the house sprouted wings and went to heaven. Different theories that they come up with about what's happening. It's a curse. It's ghosts, and I kind of use that story to talk about gentrification and neo-colonialism, where you have this neighborhood and all the houses are slowly disappearing, and the people in that neighborhood cannot do anything about it and don't know how to stop this kind of like cosmic horror that's taking away, breaking apart their community basically.
And then Water Bites Back is about or comes from the story of like indigenous workers having to work near bodies of water, and then them just deciding I'm not doing that, and so they got fired and they brought in white workers to work in the same spaces, and the white workers died, and we're like, I'm not doing that either.
No,
but
crazy.
Then the government gets involved and is like, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, that's another one that actually happened back home. So there was this big hydroelectric dam project. And of course, they had indigenous African workers working on building the dam. And then they saw something fishy in the water. They're like, that looks like it's half man, half fish. We don't know what's going on. So we're not going to work on this. This is a sign that there's something wrong here. And then so the government fired them all, and they hired white Africans. Because you're like, white Africans are not superstitious like, these indigenous people. But then the white Africans, somebody died. They also started seeing fishy stuff. And, it's funny that people believed that there was something supernatural going on only when white people, also saw something in the water. But, when black people said there's something going on here, nobody believed it. So, it's interesting to think about that. So with that story, I'm thinking about thinking about like environmental degradation, thinking about cli-fi, and climate change, and using the mermaids as a way to think about that.
We love indigenous mermaid horror.
Exactly.
Indeed.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about mermaids back home, so they're freshwater mermaids because Zimbabwe is landlocked, so we don't have a coast or ocean. So, the thing with them is that when they take you, your family or your loved ones are not supposed to cry for you. And if they cry for you, the mermaids will not return you. But if nobody cries for you, then they'll give you back to your family. And when they give you back, they give you the gift of healing. So I kind of like that. I'm like, okay, our mermaids train you to be a doctor. Like, that's cool.
Okay, so this is Just Keep Writing Mo Black. And we do this. We usually do episodes every other week as a podcast, but for Black History Month, we do one each week. And we talk to Black authors. And every time we have one of these these spin-off shows, we always want to ask our guests some of the difficulties or barriers that you came up against in the publishing world in your experience, because everybody's publishing journey is different. I also have some questions about how all these stories came together, but I'd love it if you could talk just a little bit about your publishing, your journey.
Yeah, I guess one of the difficulties of being a bilingual African writer is in the workshop space. So I've taken workshops in undergrad, in my MFA program. Is kind of like being asked to translate your work. I've had feedback from people saying I should provide glossaries and end notes and footnotes to explain simple things like food. If I talk about a specific food, then I should provide a glossary to explain what that is. And it's really interesting, like when I received that feedback, the same person who gave me that feedback that I need to provide, glossaries when I use a foreign language, used Latin in their work, and they didn't provide glossaries and endnotes, to Latin. So it's kind of thinking about, okay, so this dead European language is, important enough for you to expect people to look up what it is, for people to know what it is. But when I'm using African languages, this is, too difficult, and, I'm not going to bother, just provide a glossary for me. So it's, it's things like that where you can kind of tell, like, what do people respect and what, do they not? What are they not going to bother to look up? Because, we don't speak Latin. It's a dead language. People have to look that up when you use that in your work. But there's that expectation that, it's Latin, so you should be willing to look it up.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We were just talking about that today. I was in my MFA program. I had class earlier today, and one of the things, one of my person in my cohort asked the same thing. Because there's this whole thing about how much hand-holding is necessary when you're talking from a different culture, and that kind of thing. And I think it's interesting because one of the instructors or one of the guests said, "Well, we have Google, so why should I have to hold their hand?" You know what I mean? I just find that I find what you said syncs up with that. I think that's really interesting.
But I also think that, like, there's a good amount of it. I don't know. I feel like I talk about this in every other episode, but, like, Shakespeare isn't written in an English that we recognize. And so my textbooks in high school had transliterations, right? To try to keep you abreast of what's happening in the scene, right? The flip of that is that if you're reading a contemporary text that has other languages in it, either you stop and you Google or you keep reading and figure it out, right? Because I find that more often than not, the context clues are going to give it to you. If you can't figure it out and you don't stop reading, then you didn't need to understand that particular word to understand the rest of the story.
Yeah, exactly. So like if there's, food, if I describe, sadza and I say, the sadza was a steamy bowl in, the plate, you can tell that, okay, this is food. It's hot. They're serving it hot at dinner time, and it has stew and meat next to it. Like, okay, this is food,
Contextual information.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly. You don't have to freak out like, okay, I don't know what sadza is. Like, no.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not that deep, but it is that deep.
Yeah.
Just calm down and keep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm really blown away by this collection. I don't think I think the last collection I enjoyed this much was The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filia. I'm curious how you decided to order this collection.
Yeah. So that was something that I was, thinking about, and I think you took a class on ordering collections, and you kind of sent me some notes on that. So I was deciding between, okay, do I want it to be thematic or, what? So I was asking different people. I asked you, and you, sent me those resources. Then I also asked during like a Q&A event with Kelly Link. I asked her the question. You've written a lot of short story collection as well as a publisher with Small Beer Press. How do you think about ordering a short story collection? And she said something very interesting that start with your strongest story of like how you want to introduce yourself to the world, and then end with a short story with another strong story, because that's how you're closing off, signing off the collection, and then put the other your favorite stories in the middle, because reviewers are going to read the beginning, they're going to read the middle, and they're going to read the end. So you want to hit those points. I was like, oh, okay. So I kind of combined that of like thinking about the themes and thinking about which are my favorite and strongest stories in making this collection.
So the teaching us how to read it over the course of the collection wasn't intentional. It was just a byproduct.
Yeah, I think it was a byproduct, maybe.
Well, I'm curious too. So, LP mentioned something earlier about. So, I guess my question is: were these stories existing in other places, and you pulled them together, or did you set out? Because a lot of folks in our community. Oh, there it is. Yep. Well, I didn't see that page. I'm sorry, LP. Well, people may not know, our listeners, but so these have obviously been published other places. Let me rephrase it clearly. But what is the process from that to putting them together in a collection and publishing that? Because I know there's a lot of folks in our community that write short stories that try to put them out in places. And then so what was the inspiration behind the collection after the publishing journey for those stories that LP just showed me on the camera?
Yeah, so that's interesting that you mentioned LP, because it's LP who told me to get off my ass and submit my collection. Because I'd been kind of, writing all these stories and I wouldn't say hoarding them, but kind of keeping them in my dark, attic. Yeah, exactly. And then, LP, sent me some small presses that were accepting collections. So I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I compiled another list and then ended up submitting it to a university press. So one thing, always have friends in your corner that will push you and that that know that you can do the damn thing. So I always credit LP for actually pushing me to seriously look into submitting a short story collection, because I think the big, I guess, myth, if you want to call it that, in publishing is that nobody wants to publish a short story collection because it's not profitable. Or if you have a short story collection, you should also have a novel. That's the only way you can sell a collection. So looking into indie presses, looking at university presses really helped me, because university presses are not really thinking about much marketability and profit. They just pick the stories that they love, and that's how I ended up with that publisher. And then in terms of the stories themselves, putting them together, I had a professor who always said that every writer, and this was a poetry professor, Professor Lyra Van Cliff Stevenon, an awesome Black woman. She was the first Black female professor I ever had. Super transformational. So she always says that, you kind of have these 7 obsessions, and they show up in your work. In everything that you do, one of those obsessions shows up. So I think those obsessions were in each of my stories that all of them were very thematically cohesive when I put them together. So you have a lot of characters speaking from beyond the grave. You have feminine rage. You have the Afro surrealism, and so they made sense together as a body of work.
Nice. Opie?
It's really magical. It's really a powerful collection and meditation on an experience that I don't have on a personal level, but I feel like I have insight, which is honestly the most I can hope for. But also, like, I feel like the insight could have been shared in worse ways.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm close to the experience versus like feeling like I got a chance to look at it through a mirror, through a window. So, thank you for this. I'm curious, like, what did you leave out?
What did I leave out? In terms of like a story?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, these all work together thematically, or like, was this everything that you had at the time? Are there a couple stories that are in there, or yeah?
Yeah, actually, there was one story that I ended up removing from the collection and putting in the Voodoo Knots anthology. So I'd originally intended it to be the collection, but I was like, okay, no, I'm gonna save this for the anthology. So that story is called what is the name now?
Something about missiles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Missile. No. Okay. Wait. I have, I have the anthology right here. I think missile, death, something. You see, there's always death in my titles. Okay, I think I have it here actually.
While you're looking, I'm just thinking about in Red Cloth, White Giraffe, how the red cloth is a part of the title there, but then it shows up later on in the story where someone's knows where they're going because of the red cloth, and that's where the freedom fighters are organizing. And I'm just like, in so many, and when it happened the second time, we already knew what the red cloth meant. And it was just, I don't remember which story it is.
I think there was another instance of it too. I circled that was just like, oh, there's that red again, you know? And I can't remember where I found it either, but it's amazing. The through lines of the stories are amazing. What'd you say?
And they sound unintentional. And there's a lot of moyos in your stories too.
Oh, really? Yeah, I like that name. So there's a lot of grandmothers, a lot of go-go's.
Yeah, a lot of go-go's.
Yeah, you know, you need the grannies, you need the aunties, the meddling aunties, they're always there. Okay, here's the title, A Missile Against the Darkness. There we go.
Cool.
So it was darkness, not death.
That's time. So, Yvette, you talked about being in an MFA program. Where are you studying?
At the University of Massachusetts, Amherst.
How's that going?
Going well, actually. Yeah, so, you know, I talked about, you know, the workshop and translation, but I think even, you know, in wide institutions, you do find your crowd. You do find the people that, you know, that know how to read your work. So, you know, when you're going to workshop, I guess like the advice I would have for other writers going into an MFA is to see who knows how to read your work and just hear what they say about other people's story in the workshop. And then those are the people you reach out to after the workshop and say, oh, hey, do you want to form a writing group? Some of these stories were written during like we did kind of like a summer workshop together with some people that I've taken a workshop with, some buddies from the workshop. So we kind of just got together, did a makeshift workshop together and gave each other feedback. So yeah, I think you can find your crowd in MFA programs, even though they're, you know, wide institutions and institutions are gonna institution. But, you know, always find your people, you know, the people you trust and, you know, the people that are gonna hold you down.
That's awesome. We're all about community here at Just Keep Writing. So, so we have a couple more questions that we usually throw out there. LP, before we get to those, did you have any other?
I just said, I wanted you to talk about Voodoo Knots. We had Shingai on a couple years ago, but no one's talking. We had you on last week, but we didn't really talk about it much. Go ahead.
Yeah, Voodoo Knots is a summer fellowship for Black writers. So we provide mentorship, support, and classes to a cohort of usually 25 fellows. So we have the workshop, as well as our first anthology from the first cohort of fellows, and, you know, hopefully we can have an anthology for each cohort. And LP is a co-founder. Super super awesome to have him aboard and keep everybody doing what they need to do. So we operate on an anti-capitalist mutual aid model, so our fellows do not pay tuition. And yeah, it's just good vibes every summer.
It's a lot of fun, and it's super powerful, and it's a lot of work. And everyone who contributes, in addition to the fellows not paying anything to be there, also the people who come and provide their expertise don't take any money either.
Yeah.
So it's like very, very mutual aid, and like I like to joke that we run off like 3 Zoom accounts, a Twitter, and
Yeah.
So where can people find you on the interwebs if they want to follow you and find your work?
What's next?
What's next? What?
From Yvette.
Oh, sorry. Go, please.
Oh, what am I working on? So I'm currently working on an epic fantasy novel that's set in a setting that's loosely based off of a pre-colonial Southern African kingdom. So the Great Zimbabwe, look it up, is these beautiful stone ruins. It's like a stone city, and I haven't really seen that much in the fantasy context. So I kind of wanted to kind of like engage with that history, because when white people colonized us, they said, "Oh, you have this stone city. It couldn't have been you that built these. It was it was aliens. It was." They even said biblical, figures built this. They're like, oh, it was the Queen of Sheba and Solomon who built this. So, it's interesting. So I wanted to kind of engage with that history. And it's about 3 girls taking on the gods and the patriarchy in this stone city. So currently working on that. I have a few other projects, fighting for attention in my head, but I'll stick to that one for now.
I love it.
Yeah.
You had me at epic fantasy. I love that genre. I can't wait. You got to let me know. I got to find out when that happens. So
yeah, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon.
So back to my previous question. So as things are coming out, and all of that, where can people find you and follow you and get more of your work?
Yeah.
And we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, on Twitter, I am at Lisa_teabag, as well as Instagram. And then my website is just my full name. And then on TikTok, it's also my full name, Yvette Ndlovu, as well. So yeah, always feel free to DM me or reach out to me via my website. You can find me there.
Awesome. All right, LP, you're going to ask the last question.
All right. So this is what we ask everyone when they're on the podcast, at least for the first time. So what just keeps you writing?
I was thinking about this. I think my answer, changes. Like, so today, actually, I was thinking of, Black History Month and thinking about reading and writing, how, for me, it's kind of like this, it started off as this, this fun hobby. I love, reading, but then also thinking about how, in this country, reading and writing with the skin was, capital punishment. You'd be killed, for reading and writing. So just thinking about that, how much blood was spilled, for me to be able to, hold up this, this book and, and to write and to honor those people that lost their lives, for simply, wanting to read and write. So, I've been thinking about that today and thinking how, this is not just a cute hobby. This is, actually life and death. So, writing to honor those people and to flex, and say, we're here, we're doing this, you try to keep it from us, but, we're doing it and we're doing it well in your language that you forced upon us. We're doing it well. We're taking your language and making it our own. So, that's what keeps me writing. I guess maybe that's spite. Yeah.
Watch me colonize your dictionary.
Right. Exactly.
I love that answer so much. Thank you so much for being on the show, and we definitely are gonna have to do this again.
Yeah, I love this. This is a vibe. Thank you.
We're still talking about a Voodoo Knots episode, and I don't even know what the fuck that's going to look like because there'll be nine of us on a call. So we'll maybe just keep writing while Black. So it'll be only two or three of us.
That'll be great. And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.